Okay, well, I just want to point out one of the things that's really important about um, statistical tests and remembering how your variables are measured, okay? Because how your both independent and dependent variables are measured really determines what statistical test you can do, okay? So in this lesson, we're actually covering the independent samples t-test and the two types of ANOVAs, okay? Now, you'll notice most of the dependent variables we're looking at have continuous slash interval slash metric dependent variables, okay? So, knowing that that's how your outcome's measured should lead you to, okay, I'm going to be with one of these tests. Okay, well, then what's our independent variable? Okay, if you have two categories, so you're comparing men and women, group A to group B, things like that, you're going to use an independent samples t-test. Now, what happens when you all of a sudden have more than two categories? Well, no problem. You just move on to an ANOVA. Okay, so it's not just whether it's categorical or not categorical, it's about how are they measured. Okay, how many categories do they have? Okay, now if you have two or more technically categorical variables as independent, you can use the factorial ANOVA, and we'll talk about that some more. Okay, now when you have a continuous independent and continuous dependent, you can use a correlation. Generally, I still think you're better off doing a linear regression, but we'll talk about that in the next session. Okay. Now, with linear regression, you can have there's a real technicality here that you can really only have dichotomous and continuous independent variables for linear regression. But if you watch my video on dummy variables, in that section you'll learn a little bit more about how you can use other types of categorical variables with a linear regression. Okay, now there are some other tests that we don't really cover here, but are fairly common. And I'm just going to mention them briefly. And they're pretty easy for you to find out about if you're interested in them. Okay, now there's a dependent samples t-test. Okay. Now, that allows you to use the same people tested more than once. Okay, so you have before and after, pre and post test scores. Okay. Now, a chi-square is different. Okay, it's just a totally different animal. And it allows you to do an analysis of two or technically more categorical variables. Okay, so your dependent and independent variables can both be categorical. And all you're looking at there is, do they differ significantly from what you would expect to chance? Okay, so it's really just looking for patterns. Okay, and then the last test, which we don't have time to spend on, but is pretty cool, is what's called a logistic regression. And it's very similar to a linear regression, except for one really important difference. Its outcome is dichotomous. It's a yes versus no. It's a it happened, it didn't happen, okay? It's a 1-0, okay? And that's really important for a lot of tests you'll do. But it's pretty similar to linear regression. It's interpreted the same way generally. It's just a very different type of dependent variable. Okay. Now keep this in mind. This is definitely something we'd have test questions about. If your independent variables measured this way and your dependent variables measured that way, what test do you use? Okay. This is important. Keep it in the back of your mind. Okay. Talk to you later.